Hey, hello everyone, and welcome to Tony today. And it's we are meeting for the first time after a long, long time. We have me and Tony have been known to each other for like 6, 7 years, been following up his work and everything, and got a
hmm
first chance to meet you finally on a webinar kind of a show, Tony. So thank you so much
Yep.
for joining. So, Tony, would you like to just give a quick intro about yourself, by the way?
Sure. Thanks, Setu. Thanks for inviting me to your show. It's a pleasure. It has been a pleasure to know you for all these years. Of course, we had the opportunity also to share some time together during the Black Hat, and it was great. Black Hat and DEFCON. And yes, well, a little bit about me. I'm Tony. I've been in cybersecurity and open source for many years now, about 25 years. And recently, I worked for AWS, more or less the same time as you. I did some work for the professional services team and also for the doing incident response, consulting, security consultancy for customers. And my last time there was at AWS Security doing also pen testing and a few other things. And after that, I started my own journey with Prowler. Prowler is an open source security tool for the cloud. And now I have a company called Prowler as well. And I am building the open source solution for cloud security, like an alternative for the big ones.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I mean, it's a bit kind of a thing, right? We both joined AWS around the same time, and we both were working for the professional services team for the same around the same time. And you did quit AWS and started building Prowler, which was an amazing open source security tool, which is a go-to kind of a security tool for most of the cloud security assessments for almost a decade.
Mm.
So, and, you started your own. You started converted the Prowler, taking it to the totally next level kind of a thing, and I started building a risk profiler. So it looks like an alumni from the same organization going out and building something towards the same domain, same thing which we love around the cloud security space. So really nice about
Yeah.
it.
So when you start with the cloud and you realize how exciting doing
Yeah.
everything in the cloud is, with all the automation, and the months time frame can be reduced to hours or minutes, is a game changer. So I wanted to play that game.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Totally love the same space domain. So totally excited. And I'll give a quick intro about myself as well. So myself, I'm Setu Parimi, and I have been as a cloud security practitioner for a while. Before that, I was a penetration tester, and currently I'm the co-founder and CTO at Risk Profiler. And Risk Profiler is an external threat exposure management platform. So we do all things external threats. That includes the external cloud attack surface management as well, which is our flagship module. So really, really excited to have a very good conversation about our webinar topic today, which is basically the top 10 best practices for cloud attack surface management, which is going to be like a pure technical level kind of a conversation, which is technical implementation guidance and technical architectural guidance, and what are the tips and tweaks that you can do to improve your cloud attack surface management at any scale.
Mhm. Yeah, great to share these 10 top 10 best practices between you and me. So we created this list. Of course, probably not everybody has to agree with us, but I think we have a pretty good starting point, at least.
Definitely, definitely. And so, Tony, I want to touch base on our 10th best practice today. So, which is
Mhm.
basically isolating all the sensitive resources in a private network. So, my question to you is like, why do you think it is important to isolate all these sensitive resources in a given cloud environment? And what is the good thing and what is the security improvement that will happen by going and isolating all the sensitive resources in a private network or in a private subnet or whatever it is.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. To put everybody in context here, let's talk a little bit about the history of the cloud. Back in the days, we had virtual machines, basically only virtual machines, and they were in the internet. Basically,
Yeah.
you were paying per use a virtual machine with a public IP address, right? But after many compromises and security incidents, also the cloud providers like AWS decide to create something called VPCs. VPC is just a network where you can put resources in it. A resource can be, of course, an EC2 instance, for example, or a virtual machine. Having everything over VPCs now is like the standard, but when it comes to VPCs, we have different type of subnets. It's a way to put also networks in a virtual private cloud in your own network, cloud network. You can have public subnets or private subnets.
Yeah.
That is going to depend on the access to the internet and also the public or private IP address. When it comes to placing data like a database or like using a database service like RDS, or even if you have your own instance with a database or the data layer of your infrastructure, the good practice is to put those resources into the private subnet, which means that the only way to access that private subnet has to be from a public subnet with proper routing tables, proper routing table configuration, security groups, etc., and a few other concepts like VPC endpoints, etc. But the good practice here is to isolate the data layer into private subnets.
Mm-hmm.
That is the take out from here.
Yeah, yeah. And so, Tony, we do a lot of security engineering to make sure we keep a tab on making sure all the resources or most of the resources which are supposed to be not public or which are supposed to be only private. So we do normally try to keep a tab on them, right? Or we try to go ahead and make sure they are not actually public. So what do you suggest, Tony, if there is a database and it's in cloud, and you as a user want to access the database from your machine as a developer and do some basic administration tasks? So what would be a normal approach to make sure this individual database is not publicly accessible to the internet, or what are the normal security settings that you take care of here?
There are different ways, but we can highlight, for example, using a Bastion host or using even SSM. Nowadays, in AWS, for example, still a lot of people thinking that the best way to get access to a virtual machine is using SSH. But SSH means that you need network direct access to that SSH port, right? But in the other side, if you use SSM System Manager, you can enable the access manager, I think is the name,
Yeah.
which is basically a way to access through SSH through SSM to
Yeah.
the instance. It's like an SSH tunnel, but using SSM. That is using the public APIs, nothing about the instance.
Got
That
it. So what?
allows you to get access to anywhere inside your VPC without having to access to the virtual machine directly.
Nice. So what you're saying is like if you want to go ahead and make any server accessible, servers administration port or a database administration port accessible for performing any admin activities, they don't have to be actually made open to the internet. Instead, we can use some of the services within the cloud service providers. For example, what you're saying is we can use AWS SSM directly, and SSM will open an SSH terminal without you having to log in from your machine to the EC2 server directly. So yeah, that's a nice thing. And are there similar kind of things available in Azure and GCP as well?
Um, I'm not very good at Azure VPC for that. So I don't know the SSM service, the similar service for Azure or GCP, to be honest. I don't know. Do you
Oh,
know that?
yeah.
I bet they have also
Yeah,
because
yeah. Because when I was
there is
initially
everything.
using, right, when I was always trying to SSH into my Google Cloud servers, it was easy, Tony. All we have to do is that click on the SSH button in the Google Cloud, and we don't have to expose that. So Google has it. I think
Hmm.
most of the time, if AWS and Google Cloud are having, Azure will also have it. I have never used in Azure myself, so yeah, I wish
I'm
that.
thinking now that I'm thinking probably for the three major cloud providers using Cloud Shell
Yes, Cloud Shell. Yes.
can be an option because Cloud Shell basically is a shell in a container in your own account, and some providers they allow you to deploy that Cloud Shell inside a specific VPC. So
Yes.
then you can jump inside the VPC to anywhere. And the Cloud Shell is like not regular terminal
They-
shell in the browser. So
Yes, yes, yes. I remember using the same Cloud Shell in AWS to go ahead and run Prowler in multiple accounts because we used to have like hundreds of AWS accounts, and we don't want to go ahead and run compute that scans all these 100 accounts manually. So I remember
mm,
using AWS Cloud Shell to go ahead and deploy a CloudFormation stack on the top level to go ahead and run Prowler in that AWS account locally, and then run the scan, Prowler scan, assess the cloud environment, and push the findings to the security hub, whatever it is. So we were doing that kind of a thing. So now I can recall, yes, the Cloud Shell is the best way to go then.
yeah, it's very straightforward. Yep.
Yeah. So jumping on to
Good.
our next, best practice, Tony. You want to go next?
Okay. Yeah, let's go to the number 9, the apply least privilege by default. So why this is important, Seru, and how can we reduce the attack surface if we apply least privilege?
Yeah, yeah. So I mean, I personally believe that the most important part of cloud security is IAM, and at the same
Mhm.
time, IAM is the most difficult thing to get right as well because of the number of services that are present in any given public service cloud provider, and each and every service having 200 300 APIs. So now if you want to go ahead and craft a least privilege kind of a policy to a resource, it's a very difficult thing as well. Even when I was a security engineer, right, it was always easy for me to go ahead and write a policy and tell to all of my development team members, telling like, guys, whenever you're creating an IAM role, you need to make sure that IAM role is very least privilege, and you're assigning it to that individual resource. But now I'm wearing a hat of a CTO, and implementing that is really not easy, especially if you are building modern cloud native applications that are event driven with event driven architectures. It's hard as well. So why it is important is the question, right? If it is why it is important is, if you get your IAM right, and if you get your resource policy right, uh, the attack surface will drastically reduce. So if the resource policy is, for example, in some cloud providers, you can implement a global resource policy. In AWS, they call them as AWS Organization Service Control Policies. So you can implement those global policies as a proactive measure to go ahead and prevent any insecure configurations being created. Like I am like EC2 server being public to the internet with port 22. Creating that, like from the organization level, that IAM policy will block it. So, and then even if you're going ahead and exposing your web server, and your web server needs to access another service like S3, so the IAM role which is attached to the web server or the EC2 server, we need to make sure that individual IAM role or policy does not just give access to the entire S3 service, does not just give access to the whole bucket with all the admin permissions. So we need to make sure, like, okay, if the only job of this individual web server to access that S3 bucket is to get the data and put the data, So just allow those two API calls in your IAM policy, because tomorrow if this individual IAM server, sorry, individual EC2 server gets compromised, the attacker won't be getting access to your entire S3 service with a lot of buckets in it, and the attacker will not be able to get an admin access to your S3 bucket where they can dump the data, hold the data, or delete the bucket, or cause some ransomware kind of an attack. So that's the reason I always believe that configuring least privilege by default adds a lot of security in terms of security posture management.
Hmm. The good thing here is that the cloud providers are moving slowly, but moving towards the secure by default
Yes.
configurations. I mean,
Yeah.
they always say that they are secure by default because, of course, if you don't add anything, it is secure, right? But the services are to start building stuff. So, for example, if you go to AWS Glue or Amazon Glue, I don't know the exact name, but Glue is like a ETL, right?
Yes.
Out of the box, the primary, or I think the name is primary of the
Mhm.
resource that they have is not following the security best practices because it's not encrypted by default, or it's not, you know. Um, I wish they can create stuff and force the users to create stuff secure by default.
Yeah.
Of course, security means money. Hardening means even more money. So they don't want to give away money, of course, because this is a business. But yeah, it's there is a lot to do yet.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree, Tony. Because when the initial days of AWS, right, or Google Cloud or Azure, if you want to go ahead and create an bucket, by default, the bucket is not private sometimes. And if you want to go ahead and launch an EC2 server, by default, the port 22 is open to the internet. And if you want to go ahead and create an Elasticsearch cluster, by default, the Elasticsearch clusters will not have authentication and will have the Kibana dashboard access to the, I mean, it has a public internet access. And the Elasticsearch
Hmm.
clusters APIs are also public to the internet. And if you go ahead and create an EKS cluster, even the EKS clusters main control plane APIs are also public to the internet without any proper authentication. So what you said is 100% right. Now the cloud providers are making steps to implement that secure by default kind of a thing, but it was a
Hmm.
huge pain in past because of these type of things.
Totally, yeah.
Nice,
Okay,
nice.
let's move to the number 8: continuous asset discovery and inventory management. Wow, this is tough. This is really tough because what is a resource? What is important to know? Pretty much everything is important to know, but yeah, let's talk a little bit about why this is important. What do you think this is important?
I mean, for me, right, making sure you know everything is very important, Tony. The reason is you can't secure something that you don't know. So you may have, I mean, initially when we had the AWS accounts, right, in my team, in my organization, each and every development team used to use their own credit card and create an AWS account and start paying I mean, each and every business unit used to have their own AWS accounts. So as a security team in the initial days, I didn't know how many AWS accounts are there in my organization. So they tell me like, okay, this is the AWS account. The DevOps team tells me, and then later we come to know that there is another AWS organization which is being used by a different team, which we have no security controls or anything. And in some cases, right, what even happens is those AWS accounts will have those VPCs, and those VPCs will have VPN tunnels back to the data centers. So now just imagine you have an unmanaged AWS environment out there, which is not aware to the security team, and that individual AWS environment is having a direct VPN tunnel connection to our data center without any firewalls. So the security engineering team struggles a lot by working with the network team to set up all the IDS, IPS, firewall, and everything to protect their data center. And now comes this amazing AWS account from out of the blue, which has direct VPN connection with no firewall inspection, no IPS inspection, straight to your private subnets in your data center. And that's a huge security gap as well, right? So,
Yeah.
and the same way, right? If the security engineering team was aware of this individual AWS account or cloud environment out there, they would have definitely secured it, they would have definitely hardened it, they would have implemented security policies all over it, and they would have secured it. So for me, the most fearful part is those unknowns, Tony. I'm always confident with the ones which I know, but I'm always very afraid because of those unknown assets that are out there. And that is the reason why I always believe that having this continuous asset discovery kind of a process, continuous environment scanning, identifying your cloud environments, identifying your updating your inventory on a regular basis, and making sure it's not just updating in single directions, like a bi-directional sync should be there. For example, in the
Mhm.
cloud environment, right, we do have something called as ephemeral devices. All of a sudden, there can be like 10 EC2 servers or 10 Amazon VM instances coming up, and after some time, they die. That's their ephemeral nature. Once the job is done, they die. But if my inventory management is not getting updated with all this latest information in a continuous fashion, I'll be getting a lot of blind spots as well. So once I get a lot of blind spots, it's very hard in terms of managing the security risk and implementing the security controls to these assets. So that's why I always feel that continuous asset discovery and having an accurate inventory of all my internal resources, all my exposed resources is very important.
Yeah. For that, we have AWS Config. We have the security center in Azure, right? The resource graph. And
Yeah.
but in any case, to have a proper inventory is hard in any cloud. There are talks about, last year we had a talk at the Forward Cloud Sec about inventory in Google Cloud. It was a real example of how challenging that can be. If you
Yeah.
go to AWS, it's exactly the same. So not even the new resource manager is the new inventory or resource explorer, right? It's not even covering all the resource types. It's covering a lot of them, but not all of them.
Yeah.
So it is a big challenge, because at the end of the day, you have to go through all available services, all the available API actions to list and describe.
Yes.
So that is why it's very important, and this is leading us to the number 7, to know what you have and also monitor that configuration. What you have is part of what you are going to pay.
Yeah.
So, and your billing and cost, in the case of AWS Cost Explorer, you can see a lot of things of what you have, and that is very helpful for security, because it's kind of the modern IDS. So if you have a fleet of EC2 instances mining Bitcoins or whatever, of course your bill is going to grow. So to have limits or budgets in your billing is a very good idea. It's kind of a
Yeah.
firewall for billing. But in that case, there are some changes that are not going to be reflected in your bill. And changes, of course, that are going to impact in your security. For example, changes in a security group, changes in an S3 resource policy, right? S3 bucket policy. So that is because that doesn't cost money directly.
Yeah.
So you are not going to be, you have 5,000 security groups. So you
Yeah.
pay for the EC2s or the resources covered by the EC2, by the security group. So to monitor the changes of important resources, like a security group, like a routing table, like a VPC, like an internet gateway, like a load balancer, etc. That is key. So there are many different ways to monitor that, of course. Again, with AWS Config, with the similar solutions for GCP, like the command center, etc. So that is key. In this case, of course, we are mentioning cloud native solutions or vendors solutions.
Yeah, I think my favorite. I mean, I have used AWS and GCP a lot, and recently started using Azure a lot as well because of the 150K startup credits they gave us, and we are just burning them for mass internet scanning and these type of things. So we started using EKS and all AKS and these type of things. So started using Azure a lot. I mean, one thing which I did love in Microsoft Azure is their cloud security graph, Tony. So that's a bit similar to our this AWS config, which gives you all the resources and the resource configurations and these type of things in a graphical way.
Mhm.
So they were doing it, and when I was using GCP, I was struggling a lot to get the complete inventory of the GCP cloud assets in place. But later on, they started catching up with all the enterprise features and enterprise requirements in terms of security around management side of things. And even they came up with a service like Google Security Command Center, and in that you can have a huge list of all your assets. And what they do a bit differently is they give like a security score or a readiness score kind of a thing. We say like, okay, you have X number of resources, and these number the resources, out of these resources you have CIS benchmarks, and these CIS benchmarks are giving you 100 good things and 100 bad things. And if you ask me which is my favorite tool when it comes to monitoring, not just monitoring, majorly auditing the cloud resource configuration, is my favorite open source tool, which is Prowler. Hands down, I have been using Prowler for the past 7 years or 8 years, Tony.
Thank you.
When AWS came initially, right? Prowler was one of the open source cloud security posture management open source tool that has an extensive list of what is this called as extensive list of misconfiguration checks. So there are a lot of misconfiguration checks that were. I mean, there are some other open source cloud security posture management tools, Cloudsploit that got. I think they're from Aqua Security. They got acquired and it went
Mhm.
somewhere else. But after a point of time, right, the open source rules stopped coming in. But at Prowler, I have seen a huge difference. So Prowler have been constantly adding, because a CSPM is as good as the misconfiguration checks database it has, right? So how it's not a simple thing to manage an open source project for these many years. I mean, I released an open source project, and I always wanted to release more and more open source projects. I released it, and then I understood that building an open source project is very easy, but maintaining that open source project over years consistently is very, very difficult. So I
100%.
saw, yeah, I saw a lot of open source cloud security posture management tools that came out. Initially amazing with a lot of rules, but over a period of time, right? Either the founders got busy, the source code owners got something else, and the maintainers started reducing a lot, and then the number of misconfiguration rules being updated went down as well. So that's
Yeah,
a
there
really,
is something important here when you said that um, creating something is easy, maintaining something is not that easy.
Mhm.
So we in security, we all love to create new things.
Yeah,
And once you create something new, something cool, you want to create another thing, and then another thing. And that I think that is in our heart, right? Because we are innovators. We want to be always in the very last technology, working on that. Something that I think Prowler gives me, and this is why I'm maintaining and also, of course, evolving, is because because the cloud is evolving all the time, so you have to evolve all the time. So it's
yeah,
not like, okay, I'm doing something for accountants. I don't have anything against accountants, but I mean, I think accountability is the same now than probably 10 years ago. The cloud is tomorrow is different.
yeah,
Tomorrow there are new services also now with AI, so you have to do stuff. And if you want to go low level, writing new
Mhm.
checks and new remediations is a
Mhm.
challenge every day. So it's a
Everything.
new challenge. For example, recently we added checks for Neptune. We didn't know anything about Neptune. Now we know. You know, for Neptune is a AWS service. But
Yeah,
that is probably what keeps us also engaged and motivated to create new things, because actually we are creating new small programs that are checks every day. And that is key also to keep CSPM either open source or not. But for us, that is key.
definitely, definitely.
Okay,
And
let's move to the next one.
yes, the next one
Yes.
is basically the use of web application firewalls. So when you're going
Yep.
ahead and trying to go secure your external facing web applications that are hosted in your cloud environment, I mean, how easy is it to implement WAF? How easy is it to tune the WAF? And how much security does it add, Tony? What do you think?
Well, when you have your application exposed to the internet, you need to control whatever happens to the application. Um, and not only for the most common type of attacks, but also for the most common um, traffic or sources. With that, you can, of course, there are VPNs and all that stuff, but you remove a lot of noise if you block some places.
Mhm.
And that is key. So all the cloud providers, they offer web application firewalls with a lot of already crafted set of policies and controls and rules. So that is key if you have a website or web application exposed into the internet. At least add a WAF. Of course, we know this. This is one of the most basic things to take into account, but we wanted also to highlight it here.
Yeah. And to add a couple more points to what Tony has told as well, right? I think if it is every cloud provider has an cloud native WAF, their own native WAF, AWS WAF, Azure WAF, and Google doesn't call it as Google Cloud WAF. They call it as Cloud Armor. Yeah, they are like Cloud Armor, and most of the time these WAFs do come with inbuilt DDoS protection as well. So I think the tip here is first thing is find the exposed resources in your cloud environment, and if there are applications, and if it is an application that is just behind and load balancer, add a web application firewall on top of the load balancer. And if it is an web application that is leveraging some static content that is delivered behind some servers, and you have a CDN in front of it, always add the WAF in front of the CDN as well. And we have also seen a lot of web applications that are being stored, sorry, that are running on Kubernetes, EKS, AKS, Fargate, and these type of services. So most of the time, all these services do have an load balancer in front of them to serve the external web application traffic. So, and it's the same approach for them as well. Just add and WAF to it. These days, a lot of scraping is happening, a lot of bot protection activities, and those type of things are happening as well. So just protecting your web applications from these type of bots can also be tackled with your web application firewalls. So if you're having a small application in a small cloud environment and you don't have a big security budget for your external facing protecting your external facing web applications, just use the cloud native WAFs, as Tony has mentioned, that comes with the pre inbuilt policies like AWS OWASP top 10 protection rule set, or it can be bot protection rule set, brute forcing rule set. There are multiple rule sets or multiple policies that comes pre-built. You don't have to write those rules, and you don't have to work on building those WAF policies. So you can always leverage these type of free things. And a huge shout out, I think, yeah, even Cloudflare gives a free WAF as well. So I have been using Cloudflare WAF for years now, and leveraging these type of simple, not very expensive kind of security things will drastically improve your external web application security side of things. With
Mm.
that, jumping on to the next best practice. So Tony, you want to go with the fifth best practice here?
Yep. The number 5 is implementing strong resource level IAM policies. That is very hard.
Yeah.
So only in AWS, I have I identified at least 20 resource types that they support their own IAM policies. What this means? This is that, of course, you can configure IAM to access for the roles, users, groups to do stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the resource itself, let's say an S3 bucket, let's say an KMS key, let's say Elastic Load Balancer, EC2, a lot of the different resources. They can have their own policy where you can specify who has access to that resource and what can they do. That is very popular in S3 for the S3 buckets, right? When I remember, I mean, we have seen so many S3 related incidents when somebody says, okay, everybody can access to this bucket because you don't really know the syntax of the policy and you add stars everywhere when it doesn't work for your use case, right? When you don't know how to make something work, you allow admin access to everybody, right? And that is not only possible on S3, but also on many other resources. So
Yeah.
for that, in the case of AWS, they have created like region level or even account level
Yeah.
block of
Yeah.
things, like to block that anybody can make an S3 bucket public, block that anybody can make an AMI public, or even EC2 snapshot, EBS snapshot public. So that is great. And also there is something even better than that, of course, that is service control policies. If you have your account in AWS part of organizations, that is going to be very, very helpful to protect those all the accounts part of the organization. In Google Cloud, for example, you have to enable the services, so you can disable services. All the services are the APIs, right? Are
Yes.
disabled by default. You have to enable them. So that is important to know first what you have and how it's configured in the case that those resources are supports resource level policies. So to have that under control is fine. Of course, there are many different ways to see if that is insecure. For example, in native tools for AWS can be Trusted Advisor. Trusted Advisor is more comprehensive is if you have a paid account, but it helps to detect some basic misconfigurations.
Yeah, definitely. And you mentioned, right, writing those resource level IAM policies are very, very complex. I struggled a lot, Tony, to understand how S3 policies works and ACL policies works and IAM policy. All these three things combined together. Which one applies first? Which one applies second? Which gets the higher priority? I mean, it was initially a nightmare to get this understanding right. So I used to go ahead and first make the bucket public, then write the bucket policy, block it, and then I'll see, okay, this is working or not. Then I'll start diving deep one by one. And it took me like quite some time to understand the
Mhm.
complexities. And after I understood all the bucket policy sort of things, they retired the bucket ACLs. I think they are retiring all bucket ACLs. They're putting some more granular kind of things on top of it.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
it's complex. Uh,
It is actually a pain, right? But yeah, with tools and some automation, and also thanks to the service control policy at org level, you can control that much better.
yeah. And I've also seen, right, in terms of the resources, I have seen in some banks while I was working at in AWS, the professional services team, in some of the big banks, financial services organizations, where they have a mature cloud security programs, a level 3, level 4 kind of a security programs. They do something a bit different, Tony. What they do is like they disable the services which their cybersecurity team did not approve. So
Yeah,
you mentioned the controls policies, right? They go to the
yeah,
service control policies and then just like write a one line to go ahead and disable it. So
I've seen that many times as well. Disabling regions that you don't want to use, you want your people to use, and services. Only
yeah,
the supported services are allowed. In some
yeah,
cases, also like GovCloud in AWS,
yeah.
they are only the services that support, of course, SOC
Cloud.
2 or FIS
Yeah,
120 or whatever other certification that is needed. But yeah, with
yeah,
SCP, that is very helpful.
yeah, yeah. One quick hack, quick tip, my favorite tip when it comes to this SCPs is these days a lot of cross account breaches are happening, and you don't want your developers to go ahead and give access to your S3 bucket to some other IAM role in some other AWS organization. So there is a new key value pair that came in the service control policy where you can limit the IAM roles or S3 buckets being accessible within the AWS accounts under a single
Mhm.
organization.
Only the,
So
yep.
yeah, so that's one thing which I did like, and they came up. That's my favorite thing as well. The came
That was
asking,
recently added.
yeah, that was recently added. Yeah, so once it immediately came, I just added the SCP with the org ID colon my org ID, and then that's it. And that
Hmm.
broke a couple of applications in mine, and then later I understood my in my test environment, security research environment, they used to use Athena, and they were using Athena to go ahead and assign an IAM role which queries the bucket, I mean data in a totally different bucket in a totally different organization. And then we identified a lot of blind spots with the help of these type of quick tweaks that these cloud security providers releases to improve that security posture drastically. By the way,
Hmm.
we have a question from Rachel, by the way. So the question from Rachel is like, do you have a list of top 10 that can be provided by email for reference purposes? So not sure if it is going to be Tony or if it is going to be me. We will try to write a blog post with all the top 10 best practices for cloud attack surface management. And we have already have a lot of people registered for the webinar. We will, once it is ready, we'll just share it across the social media handles and also via email to all the participants on this webinar, by the way.
Yeah, I think
Thanks.
we can make our notes public with some some
Yeah,
edits.
yeah, yeah, a lot of it actually. So yeah, I mean that brings to the next one, Tony. You wanna take this up?
Yeah, well, detection, enable threat detection and IPS in the cloud. That is also very important to detect what is happening in the cloud way as well.
Yeah,
Of course, we are aware of traditional IPS or IDSs, which
yeah,
in some cases, with the proper configuration, they can work very well also in the cloud. But when we talk about threats in the cloud, there are other things to take into account, like the API activity. Since in the cloud everything is through the API, we
yeah,
need to monitor the API activity, right?
yeah,
IAM, assumed roles, what IAM is doing, the different users or roles are doing. So any unusual behavior has to be monitored. So
yeah,
enabling at least in the production accounts or the accounts that you have important resources.
yeah,
For AWS, for example, to enable guard duty. I think Google Cloud has Cloud IDS or something like that. That is key because they look for the traffic, they look
yeah,
for the API traffic also inside CloudTrail in the case of guard duty,
yeah,
CloudTrail activity, where you can see everything that is going on in your resources, and DNS traffic as well. So among a few other things, but they put everything together and detect anomalies. Let's say that you have something calling a DNS to download a payload or a command and control piece of software into an EC2 instance that has been compromised. So
yeah,
guard duty can detect good amount of those activities. Not everything, but it's learning continuously. So to
yeah,
have
yeah,
that at least in production accounts is key, because those solutions or native solutions are not very cost effective,
Yeah.
but you need them. You need them.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's an easy twins, right? Like going ahead and putting a web application for firewall, turning it on, and keeping the threshold a bit low so that the high confidence alerts will be blocked. In the same way, having the guard duty turned on, it doesn't take a lot of work for any developer or else cloud security engineer to go ahead and turn it on. And they even made it much more easier these days. You just have to go ahead and do it from an if you do it from the organization account with a single shot, you can enable the AWS guard duty in all your organizations OUs. And then to even make it much more easier, right, you can centralize those logs coming into just one single S3 bucket. So and now once it comes to an S3 bucket, most of these product based companies or most of the enterprises these days do have application performance monitoring solutions these days. And these
Mm.
application performance monitoring solutions like Datadog, Sumo Logic, all these tools, you can always go ahead and point this S3 bucket and send out automatic incidents to the developers. Or even if you don't have any of these APM tools in your organization, even the cloud native security tools where you can go ahead and like Security Hub, the guard duty can push the alerts to Security Hub. Then even in your Security Hub, from Security Hub, you can push it to your Azure Sentinel if your company is using Azure Sentinel as a SIM, or Google Command Center. I mean, all these cloud service providers these days started
Mm.
having the cross I mean, cross tenant, not cross tenant, cross provider kind of an integration in place. So now you can use Microsoft Cloud Security Explorer to go ahead and monitor the misconfigurations in AWS. So these type of things are coming, but the only problem is the coverage. The coverage, there are a lot of blind spots because on an for example, if it is reInvent next month, AWS reInvent, and in reInvent each and every service will have some new offerings, new APIs coming out. Okay, and on top of it they release few new services itself every reInvent. So even while working at AWS, right, just to make sure we are updated in the latest cloud services that came out, and this because once the cloud services come out, the customers will start using it, and the first question they ask is like, okay, how can we secure this? And then we,
Totally.
in the professional services team, will be going ahead and starting researching and then learning it on the fly, and keeping a track of the latest services itself is a pain because these guys release at so fast pace, it becomes very complex. So my
Yeah.
suggestion is going ahead and enabling the default cloud native security tools, which are not very cost efficient, as Tony has told. It's always a quick win in terms of securing your external threats, because any external probing and all these type of things, you get guard duty alerts. And once you get a guard duty alert telling that there is a brute force attack happening on the EC2 server, that means that you know, okay, this server is exposed to the internet. Why did I expose it? And then you get something like command and control server has been contacted. Okay, why my internal server is contacting to some malicious command and control server that is out there? So that kind of a threat intelligence capabilities are also pre-baked in these cloud native security tools. So always good to enable
Mm.
these things which are not very expensive.
Yep. So we have 10 minutes all for the top three.
Top three, yeah. The last, we can wrap these things in the next 5 minutes, and then we can leave for any questions if there are any at the end.
Mhm.
So the third one is basically utilize infrastructure as a code with security automation. So Tony, you have been building open source security projects for so many years now, and you have did a lot of security automation and all these things. So why do you think that a security automation is first of all required at an infrastructure as a code level to achieve cloud security, or what are the good things that can be achieved here?
So the benefits of using infrastructure as code are is probably this is for another webinar, but so to plan ahead the infrastructure that you need and to be able to write the infrastructure before it gets deployed gives you an advantage. First, to apply some policies and some rules into that code to make sure that code is secure. when it becomes resources, right? It becomes an infrastructure. Second, because you can disable ClickOps. ClickOps is one of the most dangerous things in the internet, right? In the cloud. So what is ClickOps? ClickOps is that you are clicking over the web interface of your cloud provider and adding, removing, changing configuration. That is probably good for a dev account or for learning purposes, but not for production. So production should block any ClickOps and only allow creating new resources or modifying configuration of resources if they come from infrastructure as code, if they come from CloudFormation templates, they come from Terraform or Azure ARM templates. So that is key, not only to prevent security issues or misconfigurations, but also to plan your pipeline for your infrastructure as well. So, for example, to move from the what you have in a CloudFormation template to production, you can deploy it in a dev account, trigger all your security checks, detect runtime issues that they are not going to be easily seen in the code, and then keep hardening, improving the code, and move to production. So that is key for at least one of the most advantages of using infrastructure as code.
Yeah. So I mean, it's you have covered all the points. Basically, the best practice is to go ahead and avoid ClickOps first, as much as possible. The second thing is write your infrastructure as a code. And once you start writing infrastructure as a code, it is always easy to go ahead and implement the security configurations by default. Because once you have a Terraform template, run an open source security tool to understand, to read the Terraform code and tell you what are the misconfigurations. And if you're trying to use a CI/CD build or CI/CD pipeline to go ahead and deploy your infrastructure as a code in a given cloud environment, add these IAC scanners at your build stage. If the IAC scanners are catching some high level, critical level flags, you can always block them. So the easy thing is, if you're using GitLab or if you're using GitHub, most of the time the GitHub actions and runners, all these things have marketplace uh, offerings available, which are not expensive as well. Some are not expensive, most of them are free as well. So you can leverage these type of integrations and add this step to your pipeline and enforce security uh, deployments by default. So that brings us to the next topic, which is implementing VPC endpoints. So, Tony, you wanna answer this, Tony? Like, how important are VPC endpoints, and why do you think uh, people need to use VPC endpoints to secure their traffic?
One sec, Setu. I'm trying to share the 10 best practices here in the chat, but I think it didn't work very well because it's connected through YouTube or something.
Okay, I'll post.
We can share that later.
Yes, we can.
So VPC endpoints. Remember at the beginning that we were talking about the importance of having a proper network isolation. So when you put your data and some resources, of course, in your private subnets, they are, unless you create the proper NAT or proxies and routing tables and internet gateways, etc., they are not going to have internet access. RDS database doesn't need to have an internet access, or eventually for updates, or I mean, not an RDS, but if you install, let's say, your own MySQL in your own EC2 instance. But something that you can do in order to allow those resources to talk to other resources without having to go through the internet is adding VPC endpoints into your VPC. That is very helpful, for example, for version host, that you only need to put the version host in a private subnet and attach to that VPC where that subnet lives in the SSM service and a few other endpoints to allow get access to that service from and to that instance, for example. That is 100% recommended when it comes to isolating resources and isolating your data layer, because at the end of the day, everything that we are talking here is to secure what is the most important thing for an organization, which is their data, right? And their customers' data. So that will be the most important point when it comes to VPC endpoints.
It is, and quick tips are like, for example, in a typical web application architecture, right? You may have an EC2 server, and that EC2 server needs to communicate with an S3 bucket. So there are, I mean, most of the people don't know that they can route the traffic within the Amazon data center itself, or within the Google Cloud data center itself, or within the Azure data center itself, without leaving the Azure data center and then going to the internet, some multiple going through the internet and going back to the Azure data center where or Google, AWS data center which has the S3 service. So all you have to do is like enable when endpoints and use those endpoints in your web application to communicate with the S3 service. And most of the time, I have seen a lot of unencrypted traffic going out to the internet. For example, you have a database and this EC2 server wants to access the database. The EC2 server is not gonna by default DynamoDB or RDS kind of database services by default enforce encryption. But sometimes developers go ahead and disable it and then do it. Once they disable it, what happens is the entire data is being routed all through the internet without any encryption in place. So you can always enable that VPC endpoints. I mean, it's there with every cloud provider right now. It's VPC endpoints for AWS, private links in Google. I mean, in Azure and in Google, it's private access kind of a service, I think. So it's always good. And even if you are using any like Neptune service as well, and this Neptune service wants to talk with Lambda, there are some limitations in sometimes the Lambda has to be deployed within the VPC in order to this communication to happen, because most of them the Lambda is outside the VPC. So these type of some architectural tweaks are required. But once you make the architectural tweaks, you'll improve the security and also you'll improve the performance of the application. Now the data doesn't have to go through the internet, come back to the AWS center to access the same data. So the latency reduces and the speed also increases.
The only point is that the VPC endpoints are not free, but
yes, they are very
but adds a very important level of security. Remember, as I said at the beginning, the hardening and making your system more secure is not free, unfortunately.
Yeah. So the first best practice is going ahead and utilizing an external attack surface management solution to monitor your exposed cloud resources. So, Tony, you have been doing a cloud security posture management and all the security configurations, securing the resources and misconfiguration, identifying the misconfigurations of the resources, and a lot of things, right? Why do you think an EASM is required to secure or to monitor an external attack surface or exposed cloud resources? Why is it important? Why is it required?
It's always a good way, a good practice to use a third party, right? Third party type of opportunity to see what you have, like an external advisor, right? Of course, we can use native solutions, as we have mentioned already, Security Hub for AWS, Azure Security Center, Google has the Command Center as well. And that those are very good solutions because you have to enable them, and then there you go. But having a third party to see what you have without having to go through the mandatory path of what the cloud provider tells you to do is always healthy. Having a different opinion, let's say. So that is why use third-party solutions or tools either open source or not, SaaS or on-prem, to see what you have. Something that I have realized over the last years is that it's very healthy to run other tools against your infrastructure, at least your test environment, to see what you have. You are always going to find stuff. We can talk about multiple AWS tools. I can share, if you like, my arsenal of AWS security tools, where I have a collection of open source tools and scripts and projects that they help to improve your security posture, or at least to know more about what you have. That includes IAM configuration, that includes exposed resources and all of the stuff. Let me try to find the link, and I'm going to share it.
Yeah, and the GitHub repo is very popular as well. In the initial days, I always used to keep a tab on the latest commits that you do, Tony. I think the name is like the My Arsenal AWS tool.
Yeah.
So I always use it, and I always keep a tab like, okay, which tool came out recently, and I always try that new tool. So it's a very good repo if anyone want to check out the latest tools that you can use to secure your cloud environment, especially AWS.
I'm sharing the link with you, and because I don't think I have permissions to share links
Okay,
here.
okay. I'll
And
post it, I'll post it here. I'll post it here. Perfect. I think we are right on time, and we
Mhm.
have covered all the things that we wanted to cover. So I would like to thank all the audience who have joined this webinar, who have registered for this webinar. Thank you so much for your time. Totally appreciate it. And I would like to thank you as well, Tony, for taking time and joining this webinar and sharing a lot of ton of practical knowledge to secure the cloud attack surface management. So totally thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me and for sharing this time also.
Definitely. Perfect. See you all guys. And there is a
Bye,
different webinar.
everybody.
And see you then.